Hi everybody, Michael Davis here. Welcome to Bone2Pick. We are coming to you today from the Juilliard School in New York City, and I am indeed honored to have the opportunity to sit down with one of the great American composers, and certainly one of the greatest composers for brass of all time, Mr. Eric Ewazen. Eric hails from Cleveland, Ohio. Went on to the Eastman School of Music for his bachelor's degree, got his doctorate here at Juilliard, as well as his master's degree. While he was a student, received numerous awards, prizes, fellowships. His works have become standards in the repertoire. They have been performed and recorded and commissioned by the world's greatest musicians, ensembles, and orchestras, including the likes of Joe Alessi, Phil Smith, Chris Gecker, the late great Steve Witzer, Charles Vernon, Koichiro Yamamoto, the Summit Brass Ensemble, the American Brass Quintet, just to name a few. He's had over 10 CDs released by various ensembles and soloists of his music. He's been a guest artist at well over 100 universities and conservatories, including the Curtis Institute, Eastman School of Music, Peabody Conservatory, Indiana University, University of Texas, Boston Conservatory. He was the composer in residence with the esteemed Orchestra of St. Luke's here in New York City. He's been on the faculty here at Juilliard since 1980. And in preparing for this interview, I can't tell you what a pleasure it was to review many of Eric's works. And this is a partial list, and I do mean partial, of some of his compositions. Sonata for trumpet, sonata for trombone, concerto for bass trombone, concerto for marimba, symphony for percussion, Fantasia for 7 trumpets, my personal favorite, Colchester Fantasy, Frostfire, and a Western Fanfare, all for brass quintet, Hymn for the Lost and the Living for wind ensemble, Ballade, Pastoral, and Dance for flute, horn, and piano, Harmony in Blue for 4 flutes, Concerto for bassoon and wind ensemble, even a concerto for tenor saxophone and orchestra, and once again, just a partial list. We are so fortunate to have him here today. Eric, thank you so much for taking time out of your extremely busy schedule.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, really delighted.
Awesome. Let's jump in and talk about your early memories and your formative years growing up in Cleveland, and what attracted you to music, and in particular, what piqued your interest in composition?
Sure. Well, I grew up on the west side of Cleveland, a suburb of Middleburg Heights. That's my roots. I still go back to Cleveland periodically. I have lots and lots of cousins and a few remaining aunts and uncles, and so it's always fun for me to go back. And I'm still a Cleveland Indians fan, even though I've been living in New York City since 1980. And one year during my lifetime, I'm going to see them win the World Series.
You guys were close last year. Wow,
I know.
1 game away.
This is the year. So anyway, I am very close to my Cleveland roots. And my parents were not musicians, but my dad played the harmonica. He danced Ukrainian dances. I'm second generation, but he was born in the United States just right off the boat after his parents got here. So I grew up listening to Eastern European folk music, and because he danced those Ukrainian dances, you know, where they go down and kick out their legs and all that stuff, the hopak and dances like that. Since I was familiar with that is still a part of my style. The harmonies, the rhythms, the feel of Eastern European music, and I still have an affinity for that, you know, among composers or particular pieces by classic Eastern European composers from Stravinsky and Bartók onwards. And my mother was not a musician either, although she played piano a little bit by ear and pop songs from her day. And but they did get me this piano when I was a youngster, the baby boomer generation. And a piano teacher moved on our street, and we would just march down and take our lessons. And it just stayed with me. And so my whole life I played piano. And now composition started later. I remember liking the idea of playing a certain pieces, trying them out at the piano, and just making up things. I remember the first time I discovered that no matter what you play on the black keys, it sounded good. So I spent a whole afternoon pounding on those black keys, and I don't think the neighbors were delighted with that. But so I like that idea of just creating my own music. But boy, these days, because I teach, one of the things I do since 1980 has been teaching in the pre-college division here at Juilliard, and we have so many outstanding students that are so advanced, so young, and I'm amazed at that. For me, it really wasn't until I was a junior in high school before I started composing. I was fortunate to have a chorus teacher where I accompanied the chorus on piano, playing cello in the orchestra, failed violinist here. I had played violin from 4th to 6th grade. In 6th grade, Mr. Ludwig, dear Mr. Ludwig, he was my teacher all the way through 12th grade, but in 7th grade he gave us a grade on how we were playing on violin. And guess what grade he gave me? D. And he was the nicest guy in the world, so I must have been just awful on violin, so he suggested I switched instruments, switched me to cello. Anyway.
He probably knew it was going to be a gift to the rest of us that you were going to compose for
Not playing
ourselves.
with violin, Cello, I felt better. It was just, he probably spotted that, that was a better fit for me. But by the time I was junior and senior year, my teachers there at the Mid-Park High School in Middleburg Heights, they suggested I write a piece. I also played string bass in the band.
Mm-hmm.
So for marching band, couldn't march with it, not like Woody Allen
right.
with the cello marching.
Yeah.
But the band director during marching band season asked if I could arrange some music for them to play, so I did that. Mr. Ludwig got me to write an orchestra piece. My choir teacher suggested I write a piece for the chorus, and thanks to them, I became a composer and didn't start studying privately till my senior year. But I did write these pieces, and on the basis of that, I did get accepted at Eastman, and I felt like I had a lot to make, time-wise, to make up for. So I did a whole study of all the different contemporary pieces, had spectacular teachers at Eastman. So that's how it began.
Yeah, awesome. Oh, that's so great. Tell us a little bit about your teachers. I know Milton Babbitt, Joseph Schwantner, Samuel Adler, Gunther Schuller. You had some really inspiring experiences, I'm sure, working with all those and more I saw as well. But maybe what were some of the things that you drew from them as you were developing your style?
Well, one thing that was inspired at Eastman at that time was that we moved from teacher to teacher each year. And the realization was that contemporary music and composition is such a subjective thing. There's so many different styles, and composers, many of them, they establish a style. They get known for a particular approach. And so it was nice having different approaches. Their music being distinctive, individual, that alone was inspiring. And I enjoyed that. And I could just say, I see them all with Schwantner, who was my freshman teacher. I had Joseph Schwantner before he became Joseph Schwantner. He from my freshman year till the senior year, all of a sudden, performers around the world were playing his music, the great orchestras, they were all discovering it. But I had him my freshman year when he wasn't quite there yet. But the beauty, the spectacular color of his music, he wanted us to always experiment, to go in other directions that you wouldn't necessarily go for in writing for a particular instrument or in choosing combinations of instrument. His his love of percussion. I have him to thank for that. And then I had Warren Benson, who was also wonderful. Written a lot of wind ensemble music, and I ended up writing a lot of wind ensemble music. And studying that with him, his he would really be strict. He says, "Well, okay, how come this is a bassoon piece and not a trombone piece? You know, what to flatter the sounds of the individual instruments." And he was very careful with that. A wonderful man, great teacher. They were all great. Sam Adler was, I mean, he was a force of nature, and his enthusiasm, his love of looking at structure, and he was the type of teacher, we would look at a Haydn string quartet or look at some classic pieces and relate it to 20th century music. And specifically I had it was okay that I can name them all. These 6 teachers, those 3, I had a gentleman named Eugene Kurtz, who was filled in for 1 semester for Adler, and he was in Paris at the time, had written a very famous piece called The Last Contrabass in Las Vegas, and I remember that was quite a popular work. It was, and he was also just, giving us other different ideas and approaches. And then the other 2 teachers, when I came to Juilliard, one thing I hadn't had was 12-tone music. And so I had Milton Babbitt for that.
Right.
And I spent 4 years with Milton Babbitt. And even though Babbitt is known for, face it, his contribution to the world of serial technique and 12-tone music, his favorite composer was Brahms. So that's
right? Wow.
my favorite composer. It's amazing how teachers influence you. So when you're teachers, you got to be aware of when you're directing students, they really pay attention sometimes. Really. Not sometimes, hopefully all the time. But where the words make such an impact that it really endures. And with Babbitt, that was the structure. And see, his love of structure so much led him down the path of serial technique. And he kind of taught me not to coast, that every moment should be important, that where things lead, how they lead, Sometimes it would be a little bit exaggerated. I mean, he had a wonderful ear. I mean, he might look at an F sharp in a piece I'm writing on page 2, and 3 pages later, this F sharp appears in the same place in the same register. Look, that F sharp, it's the same, And it's like, I don't know how many people are really going to hear that, So sometimes it might be a little bit exaggerated, but no. But his love of how it all fit together was just wonderful. And the last teacher was a summer I spent at Tanglewood with the great Gunther Schuller, brass composer.
Yeah, of course,
not just brass, of course, everything. But as the French horn player in the Met for 25 years, again before he became Gunther Schuller, with all the great music that he wrote, it was absolutely fascinating working with him. So I owe everything to these teachers, and that's probably why I've become a teacher, because it made my life. So I get a kick out of helping people, in their direction.
That's awesome, and I'm sure they're more than pleased that they had Eric Ewazen as a student and everything that you've gone on to do. What was it like for you? I know, especially New York City, can be a daunting place, when you're starting out. But of course, you went to school here, but as a graduate student. But what was it like in your early years trying to get established as a composer, and just some of your memories about what that time was like in your life?
Oh, sure. Well, I think for any person in our profession, whether it's a composer or performer, sometimes you got to have a lot of patience. As a composer, some of the best words given to me was Sam Adler, where he says to be flexible, and it's almost impossible to make a living simply being a classical composer. yes, there's commissions. You belong to ASCAP or BMI, you know, and you get royalties and that. But it's still, you know, living in, you know, a big metropolis like New York, it's hard to make ends meet. And actually, when you look at the history of composers, a lot of them were doing other things. They were teaching or giving private lessons, and you read about that about the greats, you know, or they've had money problems, and you read about that too. And composers tend to, a lot of times their music gets famous after they die, or the performances, the way the money is generated takes a while. So we're all teaching. We're all involved with arts administration. When I say we're all doing different types of things. Could be teaching, arts administration, whatever that you do, whatever other aspect. And one nice thing about being composer is that what you're doing to make your living. And I was typing for minimum wage at I had finished, gotten my doctorate from Juilliard, and spent 2 years typing for minimum wage at the American Music Center, which did not make my parents very happy at that time. But I hung on, and I did a lot of tutoring. I had upwards of 40 contact hours of teaching and work, and this had nothing to do with composing, you know. But I loved New York. I love the energy here. As a composer, you know, opportunities to hear so many different groups. Nowadays, though, all over the world, you know, you can see performances and hear the latest music. That's why I say I think musicians, I've talked to other teachers too, they're better than ever. Composers are more sophisticated than ever. When I was a youngster, you know, you hear some great piece by a composer that is, you know, just kind of inspiring you, you know, and whoever the composer might be, and you go to the library, and I remember the first time I heard Ginastera's music, I wanted to hear more, you know, and go to Sibley Library at Eastman, and they had some, but sometimes the records were out, and you'd have to wait, or they're, you know, nowadays, in 1 second, you hear all these performances, all these pieces, astonishing. I'm so glad I'm around, you know, to have seen this, you know, and so it was. So the years after I graduated, it took a long time before I could just earn my living through, in my case, teaching / composing, and that little by little that started to happen more and more, and yeah,
that's awesome. You know, just shifting gears a little bit. One of the things that I think is so inspiring, and I'm a huge fan of your music, but aside from that, you have like a signature sound to me.
Right.
Like when I hear an Ewazen piece, no matter what the instruments are,
right.
You really have a signature sound, which I think is the highest compliment you can give a composer, because it's an amazing thing. You know, just like Aaron Copland, you know, or Brahms, whoever you want to pick. Of course, you can tell right away. One of the things that I love so much about your music is that it provides, you know, both musically and technically a challenge for the performer. The integrity and the depth of the music is incredible, but also it has this wonderful, accessible quality. It's almost, I think, to say cinematic, I hope you don't take that the wrong way. It has this beauty, like it creates images in my mind of things. And you kind of touched on it early with your Ukrainian background, but is that something that you thought about as you were developing your style, or was it something that kind of grew organically? I know there was a quote from Aaron Copland when he said he was looking for a signature American sound. I can't remember the exact quote, but he said something to the effect that he was going for an American sound. And that's when you listen to, you know, Appalachian Spring or Rodeo, whatever it might happen to be, you know, you certainly get that sense. Anyway, sorry for the long question.
No,
What is
no.
there? Were you thinking about that consciously? Did it evolve organically? Probably someplace in the middle there, maybe. What was that like in
Right.
terms of developing the Ewazen sound?
Right. Well, I really appreciate the way you're describing it, and the way you're describing it, the way it develops. For me, everybody is individual. I go back to my starting. What made me want to be a composer, and what made me want to be a composer. Now I'm coming to it as a pianist. Was playing pieces by Samuel Barber, the piano sonata, and although I was pretty good as a pianist, but I never did play the whole sonata of Barber's in public. I worked on it all, and but I love that music so much. And I remember the first time hearing it, got me listening to other pieces, and those pieces that you wear in the old days, you wore out the record, playing the over and over and over again. And the piano concerto, the second movement of Barber's piano concerto, and listening to pieces like that, and Copland, and Stravinsky, and Bartók, a lot of that early 20th century music is what I loved as an American composer. I loved the music of Bernstein, and the stuff like the West Side Story is, in my estimation, one of the greatest musicals ever written.
Yeah,
and the
sure.
music was so amazing. And I remember hearing stories how when it was first performed, when it was first played for the backers who were going to give money, I think this is the story that many of them were saying, what? They're going to get a bunch of teenagers on stage singing this difficult music? They just didn't think it was possible. And here it turned out to be such a masterpiece.
Absolutely.
And music like that, Copland, Bernstein, Gershwin, certain pieces that I wanted to hear over and over again, I wanted to do it myself, to write music that people would be affected by, and it has to deal with what affects me. Yes, I think about the listeners, and I do want to communicate. All artists do, whatever our style is, but the thing is that there's so many styles to choose from. And the 4 years with Milton Babbitt, I did serial technique, and you listen to a spectacular performance of Pierrot Lunaire, and it's riveting. I was just talking with my student right now about Wozzeck, what makes Wozzeck one of the greatest operas ever written, and moments of it where it's just incredibly difficult, and your average audience wouldn't say that's beautiful music, but it's dramatic music, and for many people, yes, it is beautiful music, but everybody has different ears, So I can't write only for the audience, it's just kind of for me, but it is the composers that I liked, and I am going to mix in my background, because everybody, and I like to bring that out of students sometimes. What is their background? What's the instrument they play? What do they like to listen to? What is their ethnic background? I have so many stories about this, and as I said, mine, because I'm only going personally, Ukrainian, Polish. Those kinds of dances had an energy. So sometimes in my last movements, I like to put that energy in. Gets me wanting to move or feel, a sense of excitement, and I hope the audience will get that too. So that's where it comes from.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. This is a question I've been dying to ask you. What is your process of composing when you start a piece? I mean, do you think, is it melody based? Is it harmony based? And do you map it out in advance form wise? Are you thinking
Right.
all of those things? And feel free to demonstrate on the piano if you felt like it. But I'm just curious what your, not to be too broad about it, but your process of composing when you first sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write this sonata or this concerto.
Sure.
How do you approach it?
Well, it depends if I'm writing a piece that, because I've kind of done half and half, is programmatic, telling a story, describing a scene based on a poem, based on a a picture. I've done all of these things. Photographs. My piece Shadow Catchers was based on photographs, or is it purely a purely musical without necessarily a story? Is it, am I following a certain form a la Brahms, and then this is where the audience makes up their own story. So there's my sonatas, there's my trios, Ballade, Pastoral, and Dance. There's no specific storyline that you mentioned before, my flute, horn, piano piece, although the second movement was based on, because I wrote it during holiday time. And so, well, if you want me to get to the piano, I surely can.
Sure.
Well, with that, I just wanted the sounds of bells. The whole piece began from that. And I played this. There's a lot. Remember when I said, no matter what you play on, the blank notes sound good. Oh, okay. And I'll play that all afternoon. I'll play that forever. Nowadays, living in a New York apartment, of course, I have my electric piano with the headphones, so I don't drive neighbors or other people nearby crazy, So I get that sound in my head, and then I do a lot of singing. La da 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 da. I'm not a singer, sorry. But anyway, so I'll sing, I'll come up with the ideas. So sometimes a whole piece might come from a chord. Sometimes I might want a particular type of energy to the piece. And I hear that. This. Those perfect fifths, fourths, something striking to get the audience's attention that'll do in a particular piece, okay? And then I just come up with that. I usually think of a feeling, happy, sad, exciting. If it's about nature, that's nice. I do like, getting inspired by that stuff. But I'll come up with certain ideas. They may be chords, they may be gestures. A lot of my music, I've written quite a bit of fugal music. You mentioned Colchester Fantasy. So there we have a particular piece that was involved with it's named after 4 pubs, okay? And so the Rose and Crown, oh, that's noble, that's, it's cinematic, sure. I'm writing for King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table or whatever, Or I'm writing a piece, the Dragoon, okay, that's war, that's gonna be something that's more dissonant. And so that's why I think all composers, it's so important to know all styles, tonal, atonal, the music that's all about textures, colors, just learn everything. You'd be surprised how you can flavor your music. And there's spots in the music that are indeed very tonal, but when you look at certain spots in my music, oh wow, that's quite chromatic, I don't use key signatures because I like the flexibility of moving in and out freely and quickly from one area to another. I remember speaking to a teacher at Indiana University, Bernard Hayden, who said that, that he just loves the idea of starting in one key and then the last couple measures being in something totally different. And I thought, what does that mean? Then I got it. Just that sort of flexibility. It's kind of fun. So, but the big thing is I want to know what feeling I want to engender in the listener. Simply
that's awesome. Yeah, I appreciate those thoughts, and it's so
sure.
cool that it's a varied emotions, feelings, all these things that factor into it. Let's talk a little bit, since most of our viewers are brass folks.
Right.
Let's talk about your compositions for brass. As I mentioned, I love I love your sonata for trombone. I was listening to Koichiro Yamamoto's recording of it recently. Gorgeous player, and it's just fantastic. Your concerto for bass trombone is amazing, but the Fantasia for 7 trumpets, I don't think you could make 7 trumpets sound more beautiful. Nothing against trumpet players, of course, and we love them, but to make a trumpet ensemble sound that beautiful. Anyway, my question is, do you have any favorites of in terms of your compositions for brass? And then the other thing that I was wondering, you have been fortunate to, as a composer, you get to write for the likes of Chris Gecker and Charles Vernon and Joe Alessi and Phil Smith. Do you consider, and I'm sure some of the times it's not these world-class virtuosos, but do you consider the strengths and or limitations that an instrumentalist may have when you're composing, or do you kind of push the envelope a little bit with them? It's kind of a two-part question, but I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Right. Well, I would say that I have been just so fortunate in being able to work with so many wonderful musicians, but that's kind of been it my whole life, and it's the friendships that you make. And I'm just going to say to the performers who are listening to me chat right now, and I get this from my great friend Chris Gecker, who always says that, he thinks it's so important for performers to find out who the composers are and see if they'll write music for you. So here's Chris, just this absolutely sublime trumpet player, I mean, the sounds he makes is just so beautiful. And he could get by playing the Haydns and all the great, the repertoire they have. But he's saying, he wants to keep looking at new music. And so he's always encouraging performers to seek out their composer friends. And there's a lot of great composers around. I mean, a lot. And start already, I really am going to recommend when you're students, and to go to your composition majors that are in your school. You work with them. In my case, I've never played a brass instrument. I own a World War I bugle. And on this it hangs on my wall. It's all beaten up. It looks like something that like Woody Allen might play. I mean, it's just this old artifact. Once in a while, I can play one note on it. That's it. And never played a wind or brass instrument. I had a very funny experience. I'm a woodwind instrument, working with a very young flute student years ago, 7 years old, I remember. And she was writing, I was teaching her private theory lessons, but getting her to write a little bit of music. So she came in and she was playing the piece that she had written for flute. And she had written something like this. Whatever was written up there. And she's playing it an octave lower. And I don't know how the flute plays. I mean, I have a rough idea, but to explain, how are you going to go up that octave? So all I said to her, well, think high. And you know what? She played it, and it was an octave higher. So I told my friend Bonnie Elector, who at the time who was the flute teacher in the pre-college. I says, Bonnie, I gave my first flute lesson. Think high. All right. So can't play.
Good advice for brass players too, right? Think high.
So I can't play the instruments, but what I do is I get together with the players, and this is for all instruments. Each new instrument that I'm working on, where I get together with them. Not long ago, I'd written for organ and orchestra. For Diane Wittry's Allentown Symphony. I got together. The organist was playing on the organ. This was done by Skype, by the way. Yeah. And so, showing something. I want to use that, And so you get inspired. So players, you get together, composers, show them what you can do. Nothing in the world like having a premiere piece that's for the performance that you could play on whatever, a senior recital, a graduating recital, master's, doctorate, throughout your lives, and it's good. And it's good to foster those friendships. So now, do I take limitations of instruments or whatever? It's not so much that, because it's, there's ranges, there's, obviously some people are adept at having a certain color or a certain facility or whatnot, but there are general limitations to the instrument, and I don't like to push it to the very extremes, because I've been down that road where some people can play just this really high note, great, but in performance, after a long piece and you play that high note, that ain't always going to be there, and so you just learn how to write intelligently for the instrument. That's where I got from my teacher, Warren Benson, flatter the sounds of the instruments, and Adler, all of them, and but they will show me what they like to play. And then we read through music, or I have them play some classic pieces. And I'll, working with trumpets, say the Fantasia, at that time I was, first writing, my big pieces for trumpet. And, I'd write a movement, and the music I wrote for Chris, for example, we would play that, Mike Powell, whom I wrote the tenor trombone sonata for, section by section, we would play through it. But before we did that, we played through, various of the classic trombone pieces. I just loved being able to do that, and then it gave me the sound in my ear. So that's what I try to use for any instrument that I write for.
That's very cool, very comprehensive and thoughtful. It's, it comes through in your music so well.
Excuse me, but it is fun. That's all I can say. The collaboration is fun, because by and large, when you're a composer, it's a solitary profession. You're by yourself. You just imagine in your head, playing the piano, getting the computer, after you decide what you want. And computer has been a big, lifesaver for us. But just so you can hear it back instantaneously. Of course, you're hearing the computer play it. Got to be careful with that. The computer can go, and the real life performers aren't always going to do that at quarter equals 188 or whatever, but anyway, but the thing is that because it's a solitary profession, the moments we can work with the players is what makes it fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. And for those of you who haven't checked it out, I really enjoyed the masterclass that you and Chris Gecker gave, talking about the trumpet sonata. Worth checking it out on YouTube, and you guys are obviously work so well together. It's like a, it's like a perfect match made in heaven. This can be actually from the business side, but also in terms of what you're looking for. How do commissions work for you nowadays? You're a star in the composer world, and I'm sure you can't take every commission that comes your way, and I know you mentioned you're finishing up 3 big works all at the same time. So, I guess I'm asking how you juggle that now, and what do you look for in terms of what you're interested in, projects you might be interested in taking on?
Well, by this time, I'm in my 60s, in my 7th decade. Okay, that time goes by. All right. The thing is, so I have written a lot, and I like to cycle through things. So having done a chamber piece or a vocal piece, then I'll do a brass piece, then I'll do a string piece or whatnot. I've been delighted, and writing for, when I've been writing the brass music specifically, or the wind music, that those are instruments who are really looking for repertoire. You have the some classic pieces already, but not as nearly as much as the violinists or pianists do. So we're part of being a new tradition and seeing all the variety. And wow, these days I go to the conventions. Like I was at the Big Trombone Convention in Redlands this year. Heard so many just really genuinely wonderful new pieces, and it's the new tradition. Now, are they famous yet? Well, it takes a while for pieces to get famous. Some of my pieces have languished for decades. I had a big piece I had written for clarinet and piano, and I had felt good about it, but I wrote that, this would have been 1986, and it was 20 years later, when I got a big orchestra performance of the piece.
Wow.
And it takes a while for this type of thing to happen sometimes. So that's life. But you don't give up. Now, some pieces make it. And there are, and I have had wonderful performances, and that's been exciting. But it didn't happen all at once. There was, as I said, years and years of writing the pieces, not waiting for it, because it's up to the composers to get their music out there, And again, we have YouTube now and all that sort of stuff. I mean, any of the Spotify, whatever, that where you get people can hear your music, and that's great. But with commission specifically, what you do is you approach, performers should approach the composer that they like. Composers tend to be negotiable, There's a handful of composers where whatever, they're older, they've written a lot for this instrument, that instrument, In my case, because I do like to circle, I like Bartók. He spread his 6 string quartets over the span of his whole life. Beethoven, same thing. Piano pieces, early, middle, late. And so we need the variety. Yes, you do get, and these of course are geniuses, where you couldn't have a Bach that writes zoom, 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 fugue, 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 and each one is new and brilliant and extraordinary. And you have geniuses like that. However, it happens for individual people. But you really decide on the terms, and to be careful. When I say careful with that, just make sure everybody knows that that it's going to be performed here. This amount of money. There is a certain realization. I mean, it is a lot of work. And when you write an orchestral work or wind ensemble piece, if you're copying out the parts, and these days, of course, we do have the computer, but that still is time consuming.
Sure. Yeah.
And, composers have assistants sometimes that are invaluable, that help them out with this, But the main thing is to approach composers and get the performance happening. This will be also attached to a recording, and that's exciting too, where you've written pieces and for certain players that are going to record the music. So, but it's good to have that happen.
Yeah. And you mentioned, you are a renowned educator, which we all know about as well. You're on faculty here at Juilliard and in demand all over the world as a guest artist and giving lectures and whatnot. You've touched on it a little bit. You said something that made me think, like in terms of the composers, it's almost obligation's too strong of a word, but their responsibility to get their music played. How do you have many talented students, I'm sure, here at Juilliard in terms of composition. What do they do to get their pieces played? I mean, I know, like you said, YouTube is a wonderful tool. It's a blessing and a curse, of course. We can talk about the financial side of all that. It can be a negative, but on the other hand, it's amazing, I mean, just for me as selfishly to check out all your music over the last month or so. It's fantastic. Just like it would take me back in my days when I was a kid and going to Tower Records and buying the records, forget about it. But now it's like anyway. My question is, in terms of you giving advice to your students, what do they need to do to become a composer in addition to what you've already kind of touched on? Are there other things that you guide them to do?
Yeah. Number one, once they've written the piece, they have performers that they enjoy working with, or that play their music so beautifully. You get that recording. The recording. Now, this may sound just a little bit cynical, because of course the recording is important in and of itself, but it's also kind of like our business card, because that's the way other people can hear it. Because yes, they can look at scores, but you really have to. And I know people with the best ears. I remember years ago William Schumann saying, "Look, and here's, one of the great composers and knowledgeable and certainly, amazingly gifted, but he says, he's got to hear the music, looking at the score sometimes doesn't always do it. You can see spot colors if it's well written, if there's, what's difficult, whatever, but you really, really, really know what it sounds. You get just sort of general ideas. So you need that recording. And then, okay, recording. I can only go what I personally did. I wasn't getting commissions, wasn't getting paid to write my music for quite a while. And so what I did was a series of my own concerts. If you're attached with the school, that's great. And I have a lot of friends that are in different schools or universities, and you're just I'm going to use the word networking, but you're getting to know the people that are in your school. You do your own concerts. I did like 8 of those. And didn't necessarily have money to pay the performers, but I'd sure do a nice reception afterwards, and they would want to do a new piece, and then I would say, okay, and then of course I would get commissions, and that would happen. And with the larger pieces, where you're writing for orchestra, and that, I mean, things like that can take a long time.
Yeah.
I remember my piece Shadowcatcher took 1,000 hours of work to write that piece.
Wow.
And the only reason I remember that because I wrote that over a summer of 4 months, 15 to 20 hour days, and composers are used to that. And that was true even when I was a student. In the old days, though, we'd have copying parties where your friends, they'd finish their performance and they're out and they're having a nice beer or whatever, and it's like, okay, well, Mondays you're reading, okay, so you copy out violin 1, you copy out violin 2, I'm working on violin or viola or whatever, and I mean, it was depressing, but that's what it was like, and it's still like that. Isn't it funny, even with the new technology, it still takes forever, it's boy, this again is going to sound a little depressing, but you have to be honest too. Yeah. I remember Jacob Druckmann and his wife, who was the head of the dance department for a long time here at Juilliard, and I guess I'm telling tales, and Jacob Druckmann, I mean, her husband is one of the great composers, Pulitzer Prize winner, and she said that, Jacob would say to me that composing, what is it? It's simply a very expensive hobby, because there is, your whatever, that it takes for the final thing, and the compute, everything that we take to our own websites to promote the music, I mean, it's very different than, now here's where performers, for good or for bad, I mean, they're auditioning. You're auditioning for a position in an orchestra. You get that position, great. You don't get the position, you don't give up, you try again, you know what I mean? Composing, whatever we're doing to earn a living, we still can be composing, which means that a lot of times you see composers, where it's nothing to be working, 60-hour weeks, I mean, that more it takes, because it just takes so much to do all of that. So anyway, I recommend what my teachers recommended to me. You like composing, keep composing. Right. Oh, get involved with, and there are organizations here in New York. There's various ensembles, orchestras where students can come and they can hear their pieces. There's a lot of opportunities. American Music Center used to have a library. I think it is still there, where you can find competitions. People know about your music. A good thing is to go to these instrumental festivals, and all the instruments have their festivals: trombone, horn, I've been to them all, and in many cases several times.
Uh-huh.
And they're so much fun because when you're with composer friends at these festivals, it's so cool because a lot of times you're hearing premiere after premiere, so you're hearing what's the latest, for these instruments. It's like we're getting an inside thing on what's going on there. But you get to know the players. You promote your music there. You have a performance there, or there's many different ways to be able to get to these and have that music represented.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have one piece performed on a particular festival, and I'll go there. I'll stay for several days. I'll go to other things. People will have heard it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give free copies initially. You know what I mean? You give and people will get to know your music. So, and as I said, flute convention, 3,000-4,000 people go to that. A PASIC, the percussion, 10,000 I think will go to that. It's in the many hundreds. I even went to the Heckelphone convention here in New York City. What's a Heckelphone? It's halfway in between a bassoon and an English horn. Wagner commissioned it and Heckelphone you can hear in Salome and Hindemith wrote for it. There's a Heckelphone convention because the people that are into it really are into it. And it was here in New York City. Can you guess how many people came? 13. A convention of 13 people at St. Thomas. No, Riverside Cathedral was held. And there were, and with the audience, expanded to a good 30 people were there at the concert. Not the 1,000 that you see at the trombone concerts, but anyway, and the festival consisted of one concert and one lecture. Anyway, so.
Well, I got to say, last year the International Trombone Festival, as you know, was here at Juilliard, and I was on the faculty. And Joe Leslie, of course, ran it all, did a spectacular job. But I will say, you're at the level now where I was standing inside, and people were like, "Hey, Eric Ewazen's outside." So everybody runs out to get to meet you. So you've evolved past the point of so that was very cool.
There's one nice thing about getting older, just stick around. Thank heavens,
Well, that is really great advice, and I think it carries over to being a performer too. You just have to look in every opportunity and go after it and can stay on it. It's great advice, and thank you for sharing. Your road through that. Eric, you've been so generous with your time. I just got a couple more quick questions.
That's fine.
Do you have a handful of pieces that you look back on and say, up to now, and I know there's many to come, but now and you look at it and say, well, those are the works that I'm really the most proud of. Would you consider singling a few out that you look at as your masterpieces and your works that you're most proud of? Yeah,
and very specifically in the brass world, my three initial three. Now there's more brass quintets, but initially Colchester Fantasy and Frostfire, which led to Shadowcatcher, and subsequently other brass quintets that I've written, for individual movements, or it's just been fun, with that. But those were the first three that got the ball rolling with my quintets, and then subsequently that led to the writing of the work Balkanica for a group in Croatia, Acadia, written for the wonderful quintet up in Maine, but that was kind of the hallmark for my chamber music for brass, and then the solos, where I'm really grateful for the trombone sonata and the trumpet sonata. Again, I'll mention Mike Powell and Chris for being the people that wrote that. We're interested in that. Horn with Dave Wakefield, writing for horn, flute, and piano for him is White Barely. And and then with John Rojak and Ray Mace. Ray Mace was responsible for the a Fantasia for Seven
Oh,
Trumpets
wow.
because he got his
Thanks,
students.
Ray.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.
He got his students, Dave Krause, with several of the students at the time who were also just wonderful. Dave, who plays in the Met, and they
Sure.
approached me and said, would I write this piece for Seven Trumpets? And that became that piece. And John Rojak, who had asked me to write a piece for bass, trombone, and strings. So from those 5 people, who are such great players and who, love the idea of writing new pieces. I own my whole career to. I even have in my apartment, I call it my altar to the American Brass Quintet. I have the poster where Colchester Fantasy was premiered in Aspen, a poster of the town of Colchester, England, and a poster of their European premiere in the Conservatory of Santa Cecilia in Rome, So this is my altar to the American Brass Quintet. But I can't, oh gosh, I know there's so many, you mentioned Charlie Vernon before and Joel Leslie. I mean, I have such wonderful, Ron Barron,
of course.
who got me to write a piece for alto trombone. Boy, am I going to apologize to people that it's a dangerous thing to go in this direction. It's like, why didn't I mention this before? But there's some of the people that really helped me in this brass world to get things started and remain friends, and we still perform together. And I'm still writing new pieces. My new second trumpet sonata for Chris, that's going to be coming up, and it's taken a long time because I don't want to repeat myself, and yet I don't want to lose my style. So you find ways of making that work. You know what I mean? So it just takes, sometimes I found that it takes longer for me to write the older that I get.
Interesting.
But it's still fun. It's still fun. I still look forward to it, but there's a little bit more. I did that before. Let me go this direction.
Well, you've written so much incredible music. I'm sure there's going to bound to be a little bit of repetition in there. But I know I can speak for all of my brass colleagues, and we're as grateful as you are to them for what they gave you. We're equally grateful as listeners and brass players for what you've given the repertoire, because it's just been. It's been a tremendous boost to our world and everything. Eric, just in closing, first of all, thank you so much for this. In the immediate future, you're working on 3 commissions. Could you share what you're working on right now, and what the immediate future looks like
sonata, and a piece for my retiring piano teacher at Eastman, Barry Snyder, and 4 of us who were his students, piano students, also composers, are writing pieces for his retirement, including Dave Heineck, who's at the Crane School of Music, Luke Harchin at New York University, and the 4th person I've forgotten, but anyway, but that's happening. And then the 3rd piece is, okay, this is a different one. A lot of times my music is kind of upbeat and that, but you mentioned my piece, A Hymn for the Lost and the Living, which of course was about 9/11, and sometimes music is there to comfort as well. And I'm writing a piece, it's for it was commissioned by the Southern Connecticut State University for the 5th anniversary of Newtown.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it's going to be a concert in memory of the students that lost their lives there, youngsters. And some of the people, it's going to be their orchestra, but also combined with people from the high school in Newtown, the people in the band, some of the students there.
That's wonderful.
And they're going to be joining in, so I'm writing a piece for that event. And sometimes, as I said, I don't want to end on a somber note, but the fact of our profession, we're there, as I said, to uplift, to create excitement and joy and fun and stuff. But sometimes we're the mirror on our times, and this is one of those. So when they first approached me for it, Hymn for the Lost and Living was a little different because I'm a New Yorker. I was writing a piece for the band, the United States Air Force band, purely coincidentally, at that same time when 9/11 hit. And the piece was called Flight, celebrating the 100th anniversary of powered flight. Commander calls me up. They were going on tour, and within 3 weeks, they said, could I write a piece, an in memoriam, a tribute there? And that's what I did.
That's where that came from.
And so with this piece, I want to write a piece that represents the kids, represents the violence, but represents memory, and something to hold on to.
That's beautiful.
Okay.
It's a perfect way to end. Eric, thank you for everything you've given us. Your work inspires us and keeps us going emotionally and as musicians. So, and thank you again for taking time out. I know you got a million things to get to, so thank you so much.
Got to finish those pieces. Our pleasure.
So wonderful
Thank
to be with you today. And we will see all of you next time on Bone to Pick.